The highly hyped Bitcoin reserve law in the USA has now officially failed. We need to take a very close look at what's going on here. Additionally, we have new, highly interesting statements from Warren Buffett, who has now announced new record cash reserves, but says he would be ready to invest $100 billion in an opportunity that is good for him here. So I definitely know something here. It starts with a B and ends with coin. You could definitely invest $100 billion in that. We're taking a look at it. He had some very, very exciting takes at the annual investors meeting of Berkshire Hathaway. But first, we see that BlackRock has accumulated Bitcoin again, buying 7,000 Bitcoin, quite a lot of Bitcoin, for their clients. And the interesting thing is, I actually saw and found a chart here. And here you see something very, very interesting. You can see that every time BlackRock heavily accumulates Bitcoin, the Bitcoin price goes up. So they must know something. I mean, it's not really BlackRock buying, but the clients are buying here. But the clients of BlackRock seem to, somehow, as it looks, time the price increases very well. Here, of course, it would be even better to buy Bitcoin when it's low or moving sideways. But we see that BlackRock clients always buy when it goes up. That means they don't actually have such good investor behavior. They simply make FOMO purchases here, as it seems. I find it very, very interesting to take note of this. It's quite fascinating anyway. Often one thinks that professional investors, for example, have better purchases like better buying statistics or something. But when professional investors often simply invest for their clients' funds, they often make worse investment decisions because they have to sell during a crash. For example, because then the clients want to liquidate their money, or because they are dependent on it when prices go up, then all the clients want to get in, FOMO in, and want to be part of the rally, and then you end up with such statistics. But what I think most people are interested in right now is actually what happened here in Arizona. The Bitcoin law here was really, really hyped. I even reported on it, saying that only one signature was missing for the Bitcoin reserve to go through here in Arizona. But I also said back then that the likelihood of it happening was less than 10%, even though there's so much hype right now. The probability is very, very low because Governor Hobbs is just very, very negative about Bitcoin. Let's take a look at what she said here. She made another statement. Specifically, the governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, vetoed the law for the state's strategic Bitcoin reserve after it was passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate. She describes Bitcoin as an unproven investment. I always say institution. And it's just crazy again, the arguments they're coming up with here. So, even the central banks and so on, they always say, yeah, Bitcoin isn't liquid enough, but that's nonsense. Bitcoin is liquid enough. Here, for example, they call it unproven investments. I also wonder, isn't BlackRock possibly behind this? Aren't there possibly big players behind it like Kendall Fitzgerald or Strategy or whatever? By now, Bitcoin is more than tested. It's now 16 years old. We have enough track record. No one can say anymore that it's an unproven investment or something like that. So in my opinion, it's an absolutely reckless argument. But we know that it's a Democrat, and Democrats, they tend to always have something against Bitcoin. And not just against Bitcoin, but often also against freedom, and sometimes even against Donald Trump. And of course, there's also a kind of protest. There was some law that didn't pass, or something about something. I can't remember the reason anymore. But for some reason, the Democrats wanted to block all the legislation here, and they have already radically rejected all the recent bills. I think they want to keep doing this until something finally gets through here, until they manage to push something through. That means Katie Hobbs has now fooled us all and actually thinks she's smarter than, say, a Larry Fink or the biggest asset managers in the world. She also made a statement saying here, the governor, today I vetoed SB 1.025 because this is simply the legislative proposal where, I believe, 10% of the funds could have been invested in Bitcoin. She vetoed it. The state retirement system of Arizona is one of the strongest in the nation, she says at least. But all retirement systems know we are Ponzi schemes because the demographics are just too poor, even in the USA. So, a Ponzi scheme is generally not good if the demographics were okay here, because it makes solid and well-founded investments. The retirement fund for Arizona's citizens is not the right place for the state to experiment with untested investments like virtual currencies. So, you can already tell. Virtual currency is, of course, a nonsensical argument. Sure, it can also be that they make certain investments here, and that it's not just a pure pay-as-you-go system for the pension system, but then they just buy some T-bills, or they buy some government bonds, or they just buy things that have a negative real return. And that's why it's not quite as bad as a pure pay-as-you-go system, but the return that this thing yields is still too low to probably sustain it in the long term. And I strongly assume, I'm not an expert on the pension system here in Arizona, but I strongly assume that the pension system here will also reach its limits without Bitcoin sooner or later. And I also don't think that one would want to rely on any Apple stocks or other speculative stocks or something like that. That's also something that many people partially suggest. A stock-backed pension or something like that might be better than nothing. But yes, in my opinion, it's very, very critical here that this is just dismissed like that. This would have really been a good opportunity here. I know that many Bitcoiners sent emails as well. There were very, very large calls in the American scene to convince the governor. And actually, it's not entirely true what you say, that it's a virtual currency, because, yes, it does have a virtual part, but it also has a physical anchoring with the Bitcoin mining process with proof of work, and so on. So you can't say Bitcoin is just a virtual currency here. That's complete nonsense. And what I found very, very interesting here is that we now have new numbers from Berkshire Hathaway, and there's currently a shareholders meeting, or, how do you say, yes, Berkshire Hathaway meeting, the annual meeting. And we now see that Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway were net sellers of stocks for the 10th consecutive quarter in the first quarter of 2025. So they are going very, very heavily into cash. And this also tells us a few things about potential market developments. We see here that Berkshire Hathaway's cash reserves are about 3.2 times larger than in the year 2022. What is Warren Buffett waiting for? So if you're waiting for the big Bitcoin dip here, then that's obviously really crazy. I don't necessarily want to assume that just yet. We simply see the cash reserves continuing to rise now up to 348 billion. So that's, you could say, maybe not quite a quarter of the Bitcoin market capitalization, because he just has cash lying around here. And he has now brought some very, very interesting takes at the shareholders meeting here. And there have always been speculations like, yeah, does Warren Buffett want to buy Bitcoin now or why? Is he accumulating so much cash? I mean, first of all, you have to say, when cash is involved, it means that you are potentially projecting or expecting a crash. We also see statistics showing that most billionaires have lost money this year, lost money in the stock market, and so on. Warren Buffett was one of the few in the top, I believe, top rich list, top 50 rich list or something, where he made money because if you say he's in cash, it's not really cash, but rather government bonds, and those government bonds with around 4% or so, they yield more returns than the stock markets, which have crashed or at least corrected. And he made a very, very interesting statement here saying, as far as liquidity is concerned, Berkshire would like to spend $100 billion on a great opportunity. And I already mentioned at the beginning, I would see a great opportunity here. He is now waiting for some opportunities to arise. He says here that the stock market is overvalued, which would be very, very crazy if he pivots here and starts looking towards Bitcoin. But he also says, for example, that gold is just a glittering stone and doesn't generate any cash flow, and so on. So he's just a typical old school investor who simply wants a dividend, who wants some kind of business purpose, who wants cash flow, and so on. That's why he finds it very, very difficult with Bitcoin. And he's also at an advanced stage now. So it's understandable that he doesn't completely change his investment approach. But he had more interesting takes. For example, he says, never bet against America. The stock market will be fine in the end. So he definitely sees the trade conflict as well. That despite the current problems, one should not bet against America. Because many people are shorting America now, saying what Donald Trump is doing, that it won't really work, or rather it will backfire. He also makes another statement saying, tariffs are bad for the US economy. Protectionism is not good. So he criticizes the whole tariff issue surrounding Donald Trump and so on, but says in the end, it will turn out well. He also says that stocks will always rise in the long term. The stock markets are rising. It's just that there are only short-term problems now. You can already see that he's been around for quite a long time. He's probably already been through, I don't know, countless crashes, endured and waited them out. Sometimes we just need a lot of patience. But I think he shouldn't misinterpret this from the Bitcoin perspective, because I think it's very, very bad right now to go all in cash and wait for Bitcoin to drop back to 50,000 or something like that to get in. So you can have certain cash positions, but going all in cash like Warren Buffett does, in my opinion, doesn't make sense with Bitcoin. It's different with the stock market. I mean, Warren Buffett surely knows what he's doing. And yes, let's say he's not exactly unsuccessful with his company. You have to give him that. But as I said, you have to distinguish between the stock market and Bitcoin. He also says here, trade should not be a weapon. The USA has been so successful thanks to an open market. So he speaks out quite openly against all the sanctions that are coming from the Trump administration and so on. He's not a fan at all. He simply says, just as I often do, hey, free trade, free markets. That's the biggest win-win situation for everyone. And accordingly, he criticizes this sharply. And then I found it quite interesting. But you can hear from this what other statements he has made. You can actually hear from this that he is essentially a Bitcoiner at heart. If you look at his statements, I would say, for example, he says, we plan to own our companies for 50 years and longer. Then you can see he has a very, very long time horizon. That's actually what defines Bitcoin. You shouldn't hold Bitcoin, for example, if you only want to hold it for 2 or 3 months or a year or something like that. Only really makes sense if you have a horizon of 4, 5 years or longer. Occasionally, we find a very large attractive investment opportunity for Berkshire, he adds. I mean, that would be Bitcoin, for example. But As I said, I don't think he will do it. And then here, selling great companies is one of the 3 worst mistakes you can make. And the same applies to Bitcoin. Many sell a Bitcoin and buy some altcoins for gambling or something like that. That often doesn't work either. If you want to be successful as an investor, you have to do the work. You have to read as much as possible. So you really have to engage with Bitcoin. That's exactly the point. If you don't engage with Bitcoin here, then you'll end up selling Bitcoin in a crash, making panic buys or panic sells. That's why I always tell you to engage with Bitcoin. Leave a subscription on the channel. This way you can support the channel. You can learn a lot yourself here. Be prepared and avoid making panic sells. I hear it all the time when people say, hey, I would have sold if I hadn't. Watch these videos. I definitely would have sold. I've heard this from so many people. Or you can of course also read books. Listen to other podcasts. Inform yourself from many sources, different sources. And here's the last exciting statement. You only need to get rich once. Avoid making stupid mistakes. And that's also what I always tell you. Yes, see Bitcoin as your core here. And with all the shitcoins, the gambling and so on, be really careful. I mean, you can gamble a little, but many people. I just told this story yesterday about someone who sold all their Bitcoin, went into altcoins, and I'm very, very curious to see if this turned out well after this bull market rally, if he really did better than if he had just stayed with Bitcoin long term. Warren Buffett is also a big fan who says you absolutely need to make sure you get your first 100,000 euros together as investments, put something in or something like that. That's also what a lot of people do until they have their first 100,000 euros together in Bitcoin. Maybe they bought a whole Bitcoin or something like that, really saving everything. No furniture, no car, no eating out, saving everything. I mean, it's a bit exaggerated, of course, but it could totally pay off in the long run. I mean, you always have to find a balance. What's right is different for everyone. Then there are the hardcore people, like me, who, to exaggerate a bit, don't buy clothes, furniture, or shoes. And then there are people who have a, let's say, a slightly more voluminous approach, who still consume and still go home. I mean, for me, it's not like I'm living so minimally, because I want to save a lot of Bitcoin on the side. I simply see the minimalist lifestyle as a life maximizer because I only focus on what's truly important in life and no longer spend my life with any distractions or anything like that. That means, for me, minimalism means maximum joy of life, maximum vitality. That's just my realization. But everyone has to figure it out for themselves. Everyone is also individual. For some it might not work so well. I don't know. For me, it definitely works great. If you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll just put a link to 21 Bitcoin, where you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, see you. Peace out.